Hi, this is Joe Chambers. Welcome to Musicians Hall of Fame Backstage from the Vault series. This is a series of interviews we did starting back in 2004, 2 years before the Musicians Hall of Fame opened to the public. We hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please remember to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new shows. Today's clip is with famed concert promoter Sid Bernstein. While having lunch in 2004 in New York, Sid tells the story of how he brought the Beatles to America and placed them in Shea Stadium and at Carnegie Hall. How did you first hear about the Beatles, and then what gave you the idea to bring them here and book them at Shea Stadium, of all places? Nobody had ever done an arena like that before, as far as I know.
I had developed a habit of reading English newspapers, and I read them regularly. And I read this little piece about 4 kids in Liverpool creating sensation in a little club in Liverpool called the Cavern. 3 or 4 weeks of reading this, and then in the trade papers, meaning the Weekly Melody Maker and the New Musical Express, which were the big consumer as well as trade papers. The language is the same. Why don't I think about introducing him here when I read about the crowds and the reaction of the kids? And so I called Brian Epstein, their manager.
Now, did you know Brian?
Pardon?
Did you know Brian?
No, I got to know him quite well.
I mean, but you didn't know him at that time?
I've been reading about him in those same papers. This young man who lived in Liverpool went down to hear them and was mesmerized, particularly by John. And I called him, and I gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. The thing I said to him was, when he told me that they get the equivalent of $2,000 American dollars in each theater they work in, called the music halls in, I thought, and I'm going to offer him a little more money. I offered him $6,500 for 2 shows in 1 day. And then he asked me, where would you play them? And I stopped to think. I said, I'd like to present your boys at Carnegie Hall. He says, when do you want to do it? I said, how about, I was so anxious to do it after reading weeks of their exploits and progress in England. I said, oh, just enough time to promote it, 6 to 8 weeks from now. And he stopped and thought, he says, that's too soon. I won't let my boys play to an empty house. They have no airplay in America. Nobody knows them. You're the only caller I've gotten so far. Nobody gives a darn about what's happening in English music. He said, we'd have to push it back. And we finally settled on almost a year hence.
A year later?
That's safe, yeah. My call to him was made around March of '63, when I'd had my fill of reading about them. We settled the date for early '64, and the exact date became Lincoln's birthday, February 12, 1964. When Ed Sullivan found out that they were playing an American in '64, the date happened to fall on a Wednesday, and they had moved up quite a bit when he developed his interest in them. Historically, his shows fell on Sunday.
Right.
He bought them the Sunday before my Wednesday, which was February 12, 1964. He bought them for Sunday, February 9, and then added 2 more shows. February 16 and then February 23rd. So that kind of ensured my bet, because it was Ed Sullivan now who was buying them, and CBS was sending out publicity saying, Ed Sullivan is bringing a British group to America. When they played Carnegie finally, after a year of my waiting and a lot of dust gathering in the bins that were holding the tickets, they only had the number 1, the number 2, the number 3, the number 4, the number 5 record in America. So the tickets that I had priced at, which was then the popular price, $350, $450, and $550
Right.
for a Carnegie Hall act,
Right.
were selling on the steps of the what do you call it? Scalpers.
Yeah.
Were selling those tickets for about $100 for the 350 seat, about $150 for the 450 seat.
Even then?
Pardon?
I mean,
It was amazing. You could not get a ticket, and people were fighting for it. Parents of kids were calling me, and
I mean, $150 is a lot of money today
It
for
was.
a ticket, but that was
but that's what they were selling for. They went up to, for the orchestra, they were up to 200 or 250. And anyway, we hit the jackpot with that one. The following year, Brian, who was so pleased at the way the Carnegie Hall 2 shows ran down, we secured them beautifully. There were no problems. And the kids, with all the screaming and everything, did not damage
right.
that beautiful hall. And no damage at all. Mainly a female audience.
Right.
Unlike the Stones, which was the second act I brought. And nobody seems to ever ask me about the Stones.
I will in just a minute. Did the Beatles hold true to their $6,500 contract a year later?
It wasn't bad. I came out with a plus of about $10,000, which was a lot of money in those days for tickets that were priced at $350, $450,
Right.
and $550. But the gentleman who operated the box office said, "Sid, what's your plans next? You've scored a big one. We've never had a sale like this in the history of Carnegie Hall. People waiting last night. I didn't know because I didn't get down there till the next morning when the tickets went on sale." So we had people with blankets and parents feeding their kids coffee and bringing them more blankets who wanted to be online first to get seats.
Right.
We've never had an experience like this. Now it's all over. And the papers were just full of stories about the event. And this nice old gentleman, Nat Posnick, P-O-S-N-I-K was his name, said, "What are you going to do next?" I said, I talked to Brian Epstein, their manager, after the second show. I said, "I'd like to bring them, next time they come, to Madison Square Garden." The old Madison Square Garden had a capacity of 17,000 seats. Brian then asked me, "Do you think we could fill it?" When I told him and I took him to see the garden. And the next day after the second show. And Nat Posnick said, "Sid, we turned away easily 100,000 requests." I said, "Are you kidding, Nat?" He says, "Yes. You could have run this thing for 30 days, 2 shows a day." I said, "My God, this is way beyond Madison Square Garden capacity." And I called Brian. I said, "Brian, I want to change my mind about Madison Square Garden. I'd rather put them in the Shea Stadium." He says, "How big is that?" And I said, "That's 55,000 seats. Do you think we could fill it?" And I said, "I'll pay you $10 for every seat we don't fill." Because if you'll do that, then I'll take the date, if you're that sure. He says, "You've been right so far." And that's how Shea Stadium was born.
And so how did their fee change from
He
6,500?
was a very astute young man. He asked me for $100,000 guarantee against 60% of the gross. The gross turned out to be $300,000 for the one show. Instead of 100, they got $180,000.
And that was a whole heck of a lot of money in 1964.
It turned show business around.
Yeah.
Instead of people, big stars appearing at the Copacabana, they were now talking about bigger arenas.
Right.
It turned the whole business around.
What was the next concert that you booked after Shea Stadium?
Right after that, I brought the next big British group. I was watching the charts and reading the papers more avidly than ever before, and that was the Rolling Stones. And I brought them in
To
Carnegie Hall.
okay. And how did that go?
This was about 6 weeks after the Beatles I think it was April, 5 or 6 weeks later, 2 shows, and that of course filled up. The crowd was a little bit different.
How much had the ticket prices changed?
I think they were the same, if memory serves me right. Still the same. That was the prevailing price.
Was it the same kind of pandemonium for them, or?
Even more. Kids stood up on the seats.
Was there as many requests?
The walls shook. The crowd was a little different. It was much more male than female.
Oh, really?
And I was asked never to come back again.
Did you ever book the Beatles again after Shea Stadium?
The second time.
The second Shea Stadium, yeah. Mm-hmm. And was that any different than the first time, really, as far as ticket sales or any growth?
Well, as John said to me, he says, Sid, at Shea Stadium, I saw the top of the mountain. And I said to him, John, so did I.